The lights on the set were incredibly bright, brighter than the midday sun, and they beat down on the soundstage with an intense, unrelenting heat. Keanu wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, but it didn't help much. He was wearing a heavy jacket for the scene, even though the air conditioning was humming loudly in the background. It was just another day at the office, or at least that is what he told himself. He had been doing this for decades. He knew how to push his body past the point of exhaustion, how to ignore the aches in his knees and the stiffness in his neck. He was a professional. He didn't complain. The director called out for the next take. It was a complicated fight sequence. It required a lot of moving around, rolling on the floor, and jumping up quickly. Keanu took his mark. He focused his breathing. In his head, he went over the choreography. Left foot forward, block the punch, counter with the right, roll, stand, fire the fake weapon. It was a dance he had done 1,000 times. "Action!" the director shouted. Keanu moved. He moved with the speed and precision that people expected from him. His body remembered the moves even when his brain felt tired. He hit his marks perfectly. The other actors moved with him, everything flowing like a well-oiled machine. He could hear the sound of the prop guns firing, the blanks cracking loudly in the enclosed space. He felt the thud of his boots hitting the padded floor. Then came the roll. He hit the ground harder than usual. The air rushed out of his lungs. He didn't let it stop him. He scrambled to his feet, just like the script said. He raised the weapon. "Cut!" the director yelled. "That was perfect. Let's reset and do it again." Keanu lowered the prop gun. He stood still for a moment, waiting for the crew to adjust the lights and move the cameras back to the starting positions. He took a deep breath, trying to get his heart rate to slow down. But it didn't slow down. If anything, it started beating faster. Thump, 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 thump. He reached for a bottle of water on a nearby table. His hand felt strange. It was shaking, just a little tremor that he couldn't control. He grabbed the bottle, but his fingers felt clumsy, like they didn't belong to him. He brought the bottle to his lips and missed, spilling some water down his chin. He laughed it off, looking at a crew member nearby and shrugging, pretending he was just being clumsy. But inside, he didn't feel like laughing. A strange sensation started to creep up his neck. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was a tightness, a feeling like someone was wrapping a thick band around his throat and pulling it tight. He tried to swallow, but his throat felt dry and scratchy. He looked around the set. The faces of the crew members, usually so clear, started to look blurry. The bright lights began to dance in his vision, creating white spots that floated in the air. "Hey, are you okay?" a voice asked. It was the stunt coordinator. He was standing a few feet away, looking concerned. Keanu opened his mouth to answer. He wanted to say, "Yeah, I'm fine, just thirsty," but the words wouldn't come out. His tongue felt thick and heavy. The sound of the coordinator's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. It was muffled and distant. The room started to spin. It was a slow, lazy spin at first, but then it picked up speed. The floor beneath his feet felt spongy, unstable. He reached out to grab the edge of a table to steady himself. His fingers brushed against the metal, but he couldn't grip it. His strength was draining away, leaking out of him like water from a broken cup. He felt the sharp, sudden pain in the center of his chest. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a piercing pressure, like a heavy weight had been dropped right onto his breastbone. He gasped, clutching his chest with his hand. The pressure was immense, squeezing the air out of his lungs. He couldn't breathe. He tried to take a breath, but his chest wouldn't expand. The noise of the set seemed to fade away. The shouts of the director, the clanking of equipment, the buzzing of the lights, it all turned into a low, steady hum. Keanu's knees buckled. He didn't feel the impact when he hit the floor. He just felt the coldness of the surface against his cheek. He was looking up at the ceiling now. The huge lights above him looked like blinding suns. He saw faces leaning over him. Their mouths were moving, but he couldn't understand what they were saying. He saw the fear in their eyes. He saw someone running toward him, maybe a medic, but the figure was just a blur of color. "This is it," he thought. The thought was strangely calm. This is how it ends. He wasn't thinking about the movie. He wasn't thinking about his career or the money or the fame. His mind went to a much quieter place. He thought about his sister. He thought about sitting on a quiet porch, just talking and laughing. He thought about the people he had loved and lost. A deep sadness washed over him,
mixed with a profound sense of tiredness. He was so tired, he just wanted to close his eyes and sleep. The pressure in his chest got heavier and heavier, pushing him down into the floor. He tried to lift his arm, to reach out to someone, but it was too heavy. It felt like it was made of lead. He let it drop. The darkness started at the edges of his vision and crept inward. The bright lights turned gray, then black. The voices became distant echoes. The cold floor felt like it was the only thing left in the world. He felt a hand on his shoulder, shaking him gently, but it felt like it was happening to someone else.
Then the silence took over. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was an empty, vast silence. He was floating in a void. There was no up or down, no light or dark, just nothing. The pain in his chest vanished, replaced by a numbness that spread through his entire body. He felt himself drifting away, untethered from the world of the sound stage and the movie cameras. He was just a consciousness, unspooling into the dark. On the set, panic was setting in. People were shouting for help. "Call 911! Get the medic! Keanu, stay with us!" But he couldn't hear them anymore. The story had paused. The star of the show was gone, leaving behind a shell that lay motionless on the floor, surrounded by the props and lights of a make-believe world that had suddenly become very, very real. The air in the room grew thick with tension as everyone realized that this wasn't a scene, this wasn't a take, this was a man fighting for his life, and for the moment, he was losing the battle. The director stood frozen, holding his headset, his face pale, watching the man who had been so full of life just seconds ago, now lying so still. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching out into an eternity as they waited for the ambulance to arrive. Coming back to consciousness was not like the movies. There was no sudden gasp for air, no bolting upright in a panic. It was a slow, lazy drift, like a feather floating down from a high ceiling. At first, there was nothing, just a deep, heavy blackness that felt safe and quiet. But slowly, sounds began to creep in. A steady, rhythmic beeping, the soft shuffle of shoes on a hard floor, the low hum of a machine working in the corner. Keanu's eyelids felt like they were glued shut. He tried to move, but his body felt incredibly heavy, as if he were made of stone. He lay there for a long time, just listening. The sounds were sharp and clear, cutting through the fog in his brain. The smell was the next thing to hit him. It was a distinct, clean scent, a mixture of alcohol, soap, and cold air. It was the smell of a hospital. He finally managed to pry his eyes open. The light was dim, which was a relief. He was not on the movie set. The harsh, blinding studio lights were gone. Above him, he saw a white ceiling with rectangular tiles. There was a water stain in one corner, shaped a bit like a cloud. He stared at it for a while, trying to remember how he got there. Memories flashed in his mind, the tightness in his chest, the spinning room, the cold floor. Then, nothing. He turned his head slowly to the side. There was an IV stand next to the bed, a clear bag of fluid dripping slowly down a long tube and into his arm. He followed the tube with his eyes until it disappeared under a white blanket. He was wearing a hospital gown, the kind that ties in the back and leaves you feeling exposed and cold. He wiggled his toes. They moved. He took a deep breath. His lungs filled with air, though it felt a bit shallow. A sliding glass door opened quietly at the foot of the room. A woman in blue scrubs walked in. She looked kind, with laugh lines around her eyes, and her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She was holding a clipboard. When she saw that his eyes were open, she smiled. It wasn't an excited, starstruck smile. It was the smile of a nurse who was glad to see her patient awake. "Welcome back," she said softly. She walked over to the side of the bed and checked the monitor above his head. "You gave us quite a scare there." Keanu tried to speak, but his throat was dry and scratchy. It felt like he had swallowed sand. "Water," he croaked. The word was barely a whisper. "Of course," the nurse said. She poured water from a plastic pitcher into a cup with a straw. She gently held the straw to his lips. "Small sips, don't rush it." The water was cool and felt amazing as it went down.
He drank a little, then leaned his head back against the pillow. "What happened?" he asked, his voice sounding raspy and weak. "You collapsed on the set. Your heart stopped for a moment, but they got it back quickly. You've been unconscious for a few hours. You're in the emergency room wing, but we're moving you to a private room soon." Keanu closed his eyes for a second. Heart stopped. The words hung in the air. He had always put his body through so much for his job. The fights, the falls, the running. He thought he was invincible, or at least he acted like he was. But lying here, in this quiet, beige room, he felt small. He felt fragile. The nurse checked his pulse, her fingers cool against his wrist. "You're going to be okay," she said, sensing his fear. "The doctor is running some tests. We need to figure out why this happened. But for now, you just need to rest." She left the room, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft swoosh. The silence returned. It was a different kind of silence than the blackness he had been in. This silence was loud. It was filled with his own thoughts. He looked around the room. It was bare. There was a chair in the corner, made of cold vinyl, a small nightstand, a window on the opposite wall covered by blinds. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over him, forcing him back down onto the pillow. He felt helpless. He was used to being in control. On a movie set, he was the one who knew what was happening. He was the one people looked to for direction. Here, he was just a patient. He was just a body with a broken part.
He thought about his sister. She had battled sickness for so long. He remembered sitting by her bedside, holding her hand, feeling how small and fragile she felt. He had admired her strength then. Now, lying in this bed, he wondered if she had felt this same vulnerability. He wondered if she had looked at the ceiling and felt the weight of her own mortality pressing down on her chest. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, not because he was sad, but because he was scared. He was scared of the unknown. What was wrong with him? Was this something he could fix, or was this the beginning of the end? He had lost so many people he loved. He had always wondered when his own number would be up. Was this the moment the clock stopped ticking? He looked out the window. The blinds were slightly open, and he could see a patch of bright blue sky. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining. Somewhere out there, people were walking their dogs, drinking coffee, going to work. They were living their lives. They didn't know that he was in here, fighting to breathe. It was strange how the world kept turning, even when your own world felt like it was falling apart. The door slid open again. This time, it was a different person, a man in a white coat. He looked serious, but his eyes were kind. He held a tablet in his hand and stood at the foot of the bed, looking at Keanu over the rim of his glasses. "I am Dr. Hansen," the man said. "I've been looking over your charts." Keanu nodded slightly. He couldn't find his voice again. The fear was back, tightening his throat. "You are very lucky," the doctor continued, tapping the screen of his tablet. "Most people who have an event like that on the floor don't wake up so quickly or so well, but we found something in your scans, something that explains why this happened today." Keanu stared at him. The doctor's words were slow and measured. He wasn't rushing. He was trying to prepare him. The air in the room felt thick. The beeping of the monitor seemed to get louder, echoing in his ears. He gripped the edge of the blanket with his fingers. "What is it?" Keanu finally whispered. The doctor walked around the side of the bed and leaned in closer. He lowered his voice, making it feel intimate and serious. "It's not just a simple fainting spell, Keanu, and it's not just exhaustion. We found a physical issue with your heart, a rare one, and it's something that has likely been there for a very long time, hiding in the background." Keanu felt his heart skip a beat, literally and figuratively. He had always taken care of himself, or so he thought. He ate well enough, he trained hard, but the doctor was talking about something inside him, something built into his genetic code that had turned against him. "We need to discuss the treatment," the doctor said gently, "but first I need you to understand how serious this is, how close you came to not being here at all." The doctor paused, letting the words sink in. Keanu looked back at the water stain on the ceiling. It looked less like a cloud now and more like a heavy weight. He wasn't just an actor anymore. He wasn't a tough guy. He was a human being with a ticking clock inside his chest, and he had no idea how much time was left.
The silence of the room was no longer peaceful. It was terrifying. He waited for the doctor to speak again, to tell him what his new reality looked like, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. Dr. Hansen stepped closer to the bed, the tablet in his hand glowing softly. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it so Keanu could see. It was a black and white image, looking like a strange cloud formation or a map of underground tunnels. To Keanu, it just looked like a messy blur. He couldn't make heads or tails of it. "I know this looks like just a bunch of static to you," the doctor said, his voice calm and steady. "But look right here, in the center. Do you see this shadow?" Keanu squinted. "Maybe. It looks a little darker than the rest. That is your aorta, the main highway for blood in your body. And that darkness, it is a narrowing, a pinch. It is not something that developed recently. This is a congenital defect. That means you were born with it." Keanu stared at the image. Born with it. He had been carrying this inside him for over 50 years. He had lived his whole life with a ticking clock in his chest and never knew it. He thought about all the things he had done, the football games in high school, the motorcycle rides through the mountains, the years of jumping off buildings and crashing through glass for the cameras. "I don't understand," Keanu said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I was born with it, why am I just feeling sick now? Why didn't it happen when I was a kid?" The doctor sighed, a genuine amazement. He pulled a chair over and sat down so he was eye level with Keanu. This made it feel less like a lecture and more like a conversation between two men. "That is the shocking part," the doctor said. "Most people with this condition have severe symptoms as children. They need surgery before they are 10 years old. But you are an anomaly. Your body adapted. It found ways to push the blood through that narrow space. You grew up and you got strong. Your heart became incredibly powerful to compensate for the blockage." Keanu looked down at his hands. He had always taken care of himself, or so he thought. He ate well enough, he trained hard, but the doctor was talking about something inside him, something built into his genetic code that had turned against him. "We need to discuss the treatment," the doctor said gently. "But first, I need you to understand how serious this is, how close you came to not being here at all." The doctor paused, letting the words sink in. Keanu looked back at the water stain on the ceiling. It looked less like a cloud now and more like a heavy weight. He wasn't just an actor anymore. He wasn't a tough guy. He was a human being with a ticking clock inside his chest, and he had no idea how much time was left. The silence of the room was no longer peaceful. It was terrifying. He waited for the doctor to speak again, to tell him what his new reality looked like, knowing that nothing would ever be the same.
"But there is a limit," the doctor continued, "and you hit it today. The stress, the physical exertion, the heat on the set, it was just too much. The pressure built up until the vessel couldn't take it anymore. You didn't just faint, Keanu. You had a tear. A small one, but a tear nonetheless. If that tear had been just a few millimeters to the left, or if the pressure had lasted a few seconds longer, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now." The room felt incredibly cold. Keanu felt a shiver run down his spine, despite the warm blanket covering him. He thought about the stunt. He remembered the moment he hit the ground. He remembered the pain. He had been so close to the edge. One misstep, one wrong move, and it would have been over. The director would have yelled, "Cut," but Keanu wouldn't have gotten up. "It's a miracle, really," the doctor said, shaking his head slightly. "I've looked at your records from other checkups over the years, and it was missed. It is hidden deep. But looking at it now, seeing how narrow that passage is, it is terrifying. You have been living life on the edge of a cliff without even knowing the cliff was there." Keanu leaned his head back against the pillow. He felt dizzy, not from the sickness this time, but from the weight of the information. He had played characters who faced death. He had stared down the barrel of a gun in movies hundreds of times, but this was different. In the movies, he knew when the danger was coming. He knew when the bad guy was hiding behind the corner. This danger had been hiding inside him. It had been with him when he laughed with friends. It was with him when he cried over loss. It was with him on every red carpet, in every interview, and on every movie set. His own body had turned against him, or perhaps it had been protecting him from itself for as long as it could. "So what happens now?" Keanu asked. He felt a strange sense of calm asking the question. He needed a plan. He needed to know the enemy. "We have to fix it," the doctor said simply. "We can't leave it like this. The tear might heal, but the risk of it happening again and being fatal is too high. You're going to need surgery. We need to go in and repair that vessel. It's a major procedure, but it is necessary. It is the only way you're going to be able to live a normal life." Surgery. The word hung in the air. Keanu wasn't afraid of the pain. He was used to pain. He had broken ribs, torn ligaments, and shattered fingers. He knew how to handle pain. What scared him was the helplessness. Surgery meant being put to sleep. It meant trusting someone else with his life. It meant lying on a table while other people cut him open and tried to stitch him back together. The doctor stood up and put a hand on Keanu's shoulder. His grip was firm and reassuring. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said. "You need some time. We will schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning. For now, just try to relax. We are monitoring you closely. You are safe here." Dr. Hansen turned and walked out of the room, the glass door sliding shut behind him. Keanu was left alone again with the machines. The silence of the room felt different now. Before, it was just empty. Now it felt heavy. It felt like the air was filled with the secrets his body had been keeping. He looked at the ceiling again. That water stain was still there. He focused on it, trying to ground himself. He thought about the word miracle the doctor had used. He didn't feel like a miracle. He felt tired. He felt like a machine that had been running at full speed for 50 years and finally had a gear strip. He reached up and touched his chest, right over his heart. He could feel the beat. Thump, 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 thump. It felt the same as it always did, but now he knew the truth. It wasn't a simple drum beating a rhythm. It was a complicated engine struggling against a blockage, fighting to keep him alive. He realized how fragile life really was. He had spent so much time running around, trying to do things, trying to be things for other people. He had tried to be a good friend, a good actor, a good person, but he had neglected the most important thing, his own vessel. He had taken this body for granted, assuming it would always just work. A deep sense of loneliness washed over him. It wasn't a sad feeling, just a true one. In the end, when the lights went down and the cameras stopped rolling, everyone has to face their own mortality alone. He was lying in a bed, facing the possibility of the end, and no amount of money or fame could fix the broken part inside him. Only a surgeon's knife could do that. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The air smelled like antiseptic. It was the smell of reality. The movie sets were fake. The explosions were fake. The stunts were choreographed. But this was real. The fear was real. The narrow tube in his heart was real. He thought about the people waiting for him outside. He thought about the crew. He thought about the fans. He realized he couldn't let them down. He had fought bad guys on screen for years. Now he had to fight the biggest battle of his life, lying flat on his back in a quiet room. He had to trust the doctors. He had to trust the science. And he had to trust that his heart, which had fought so hard for so long, had one more fight left in it.
The monitor beeped steadily. It was a comforting sound. It meant he was still here. He was still in the game. The game had changed, the rules were different, but he wasn't out yet. He exhaled a long, slow breath, trying to let the tension out of his muscles. He had a long night ahead of him, thinking about the morning in the operating room. But for now, he was just grateful to hear the beep. He was grateful to be able to take a breath. He was grateful for the miracle, even if he didn't quite understand it yet. The hospital room grew darker as the sun went down outside the window.
The bright blue sky turned into a deep, velvety purple, and then, finally, into black. The city lights flickered in the distance, tiny stars that had nothing to do with the cosmos. Inside the room, the lights were dimmed. It was that strange, quiet time in a hospital when the frenetic energy of the day settles down and the machines become the loudest things in the world. Keanu couldn't sleep. He lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling again, watching the shadows dance across the tiles. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind would start racing. He would see the doctor's face. He would see the black and white scan of his heart. He would feel the phantom sensation of hitting the floor on the movie set. So he just kept his eyes open and listened. The monitor beeped in a rhythmic pattern. Beep, beep, beep. It was annoying, but it was also the only thing keeping him company. The nurses came in and out from time to time, checking the IV drip or writing something on a clipboard. They moved softly, trying not to disturb him, but he was always awake. He was too tired to sleep and too awake to rest. Slowly, he pushed the blanket aside. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat up. His feet touched the cold linoleum floor. It sent a chill up his spine, but it felt good to be vertical. He sat there for a long time, just letting the blood flow down to his legs. He felt weak. His arms felt like they belonged to someone else, someone much older and frailer than the man who played action heroes. He looked at his hands in the dim light. They were the hands of a worker. There were calluses on his palms and small scars on his knuckles. He looked at his knees, which had been scraped and bruised 1,000 times. He had spent 30 years punishing this body. He had jumped from buildings, crashed motorcycles, and taken punches from professional fighters. He had treated his body like a machine that was built to take a beating and keep going. He thought the abuse was the price of doing business. He thought that as long as he could get up and walk away, he was fine. But now, looking down at his bare legs, he realized how wrong he was. The body wasn't a machine. It was a delicate, complicated garden that needed care, and he had been trampling through it, ignoring the weeds and the wilting flowers just because the fence was still standing. His thoughts drifted backward, moving through the years like flipping through a photo album. He thought about the action movies, the running, always running. In the movies, he was always chasing someone, or someone was chasing him. It was frantic. It was loud. Then he thought about his real life. He realized he had been running in real life, too. He had been running from the quiet moments. He had been running from the stillness. He thought about his sister, Kim. He remembered the years she spent in the hospital fighting leukemia. He remembered sitting by her bed, holding her hand, watching her fight with a bravery that he could barely understand. He hated seeing her in pain. It broke his heart every single day. When she passed, it left a hole in him that felt bigger than the world itself. After she was gone, he didn't know how to stop moving. If he stopped, the grief would catch up to him. If he sat in a quiet room, the sadness would be too loud. So he kept working. He did movie after movie. He trained harder. He did more stunts. He filled every second of his day with noise and movement. He thought if he exhausted himself enough, maybe he would just be too tired to feel the pain. He realized now that the health scare wasn't just a physical accident. It was his body telling him to stop. The narrow valve in his heart was like a physical manifestation of the emotional dam he had built inside himself. He had been holding so much back, so much grief, so much love, so much sadness, that the pressure had literally become too much for his chest to contain. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the empty room. He wasn't talking to the doctors or the nurses. He was talking to himself. He was apologizing to his own body for treating it so poorly for so long. He was apologizing for thinking he was invincible. Tears welled up in his eyes, hot and stinging. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. They rolled down his cheeks and dripped off his chin onto his hospital gown. He cried for his sister. He cried for the friends who had died too young. He cried for the younger version of himself who thought he could outrun sadness by running fast enough.
He sat on the edge of the bed, crying in the soft yellow light of the hospital room, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to hide it. There were no cameras here. There was no director to yell cut. There was no script to follow. It was just him, his heart, and the quiet.
He placed his hand over his chest again, right over the spot where the doctor said the tear was. He could feel his heart beating against his palm. It was a strong, steady rhythm. It was a fighter's rhythm. Despite everything he had put it through, despite the neglect and the exhaustion, his heart had kept beating. It had fought to keep him alive. It had adapted to the narrow passage and pushed the blood through, mile after mile, year after year. A sense of awe washed over him. He wasn't sad anymore. He was grateful. This body, this fragile, scarred, and tired body, was the only true friend he had ever had. It had carried him through the worst moments of his life. It had allowed him to experience joy, to feel the wind on his face on a motorcycle, to hug the people he loved. And when he had abused it, it hadn't quit on him. It had sent him a warning. It had knocked him down to save him from himself. Keanu took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The tightness in his chest, the fear that had been gripping him since he collapsed, began to loosen. He realized that the surgery tomorrow wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was a chance to fix the damage. It was a chance to learn a new way to live. He promised himself that if he woke up from that surgery, things would be different. He wouldn't stop being an actor, and he wouldn't stop making movies, but he would change how he lived. He would learn to sit in the quiet. He would learn to look at the trees and the sky without feeling the need to rush past them. He would make peace with the stillness. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked out the window. The city was still out there, alive and moving, but in here, in this small, sterile room, time seemed to stop. It was a pause, a breath. He slowly stood up. His legs were shaky, but they held him. He walked over to the window. The glass was cold under his fingertips. He looked down at the street below. He saw a car turning a corner. He saw a person walking a dog, just normal, everyday things. He used to think that life was about the big moments, the premieres, the explosions, the applause. But looking down from the 10th floor, he saw that life was actually much smaller. It was about the steps you took. It was about the air in your lungs. It was about the ability to stand up and look out a window. He stood there for a long time, watching the world turn without him. He didn't feel left behind. He felt like he was finally catching up. He was finally seeing things clearly. The shock of the diagnosis had worn off, leaving behind a clear, simple truth. He was just a man. He was breakable, but he was healing. The door slid open behind him, and the night nurse peeked in. She saw him standing by the window and smiled gently. "You should be in bed," she whispered. "Big day tomorrow." Keanu turned around. His face was calm. His eyes were red, but they were clear. "I know," he said softly. "I was just looking at the view. It's beautiful." The nurse nodded. "It is. Now, come on, let's get you settled." Keanu walked back to the bed, his steps a little bit stronger than before. He climbed back under the sheets, the cool fabric feeling comforting against his skin. He laid his head on the pillow. He didn't feel the heavy weight of dread that he had felt earlier. He felt a lightness. He had made peace with the night. He closed his eyes, and this time he didn't fight the darkness. He let it come. He trusted that his heart would keep beating, and that in the morning the sun would come up. He was ready for whatever came next. The first thing Keanu noticed when he woke up was the absence of the heavy, crushing pressure that had been his constant companion for so long. It was replaced by a deep, aching soreness that ran right down the center of his chest. It hurt, but it was a good kind of hurt. It was the pain of healing. It was the pain of something that had been broken and was now being put back together. The fog of the anesthesia was slow to lift. His mouth felt dry like cotton, and his throat was sore from the breathing tube they had used during the surgery. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy and stiff. He opened his eyes and saw the same familiar ceiling tiles of the hospital room, but the light in the room was different. It was the soft, golden light of early morning. He had made it through the night. He was still here. A nurse was nearby, adjusting the flow of the IV drip. She turned and saw that his eyes were open. A warm, genuine smile spread across her face.
It wasn't the professional smile she wore for just anyone. It was a smile of relief. "Good morning," she said softly. "You did great. The doctor is very happy with how everything went." Keanu tried to nod, but even that small movement sent a twinge of pain through his chest. He settled for squeezing her hand gently. He didn't have the energy to speak yet. He just closed his eyes again and let out a long, slow breath. The shocking discovery the doctor had told him about, the narrowing, the ticking time bomb inside his chest, had been diffused. The surgeons had gone in and fixed what was broken. The road ahead was going to be long, but the immediate danger was gone. The next few days passed in a blur of slow movements and quiet moments. Recovery was not like the movies. There were no quick montages of him jumping out of bed and running down the hall. It was agonizingly slow. Just sitting up took a tremendous amount of effort. Walking to the bathroom felt like running a marathon. But with each small step, he felt a little bit stronger. He learned to be patient with his body. He learned to listen to it when it said, "Stop."
When the day finally came to leave the hospital, Keanu felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He put on his own clothes, soft sweatpants, and a comfortable hoodie. He didn't look like an action star. He looked like anyone recovering from an illness. The nurse helped him into a wheelchair, as per hospital policy, even though he felt he could walk. They wheeled him out through the automatic sliding glass doors of the main entrance. The moment he stepped outside, the air hit him. It was fresh and cool, filled with the scent of grass and exhaust from the street. It smelled like life. He closed his eyes and lifted his face to the sun, feeling the warmth on his skin. He had never appreciated the simple feeling of the sun on his face quite like this before. It wasn't a light on a set controlled by a lighting technician. It was just the sun, real and constant. Weeks later, Keanu found himself sitting on a stone bench in a quiet park. It was a beautiful afternoon. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. He was wearing a light jacket to keep the scar on his chest protected from the wind. He still felt a little tender, a little fragile, but the doctor said he was healing perfectly. He sat there for a long time, just watching the world go by. He saw a young couple walking a dog, laughing as the animal chased its tail. He saw an old man sitting on another bench, feeding birds. He saw children running around, their shouts of joy carrying on the breeze. Before the surgery, Keanu would have looked at this scene and felt restless. He would have wanted to be moving, doing something, working. He always felt like he needed to be productive to justify his existence. But today, he didn't feel that way. He just felt content. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a bottle of water. He took a sip and looked down at his hands. They were steady now, no shaking. He thought about the strange journey he had been on. He had gone from being the invincible man on the screen to being a scared patient in a hospital bed. And finally, to this, a man sitting on a bench, happy just to breathe. He realized that the health scare had been a gift in a strange, terrible wrapping paper. It had forced him to stop. It had forced him to look at himself and realize that he wasn't just a character he played. He was a human being with a finite amount of time. The surgery hadn't just fixed his heart, it had reset his perspective. While he was sitting there, a young man walked by on the path. He did a double take, stopping in his tracks. He looked at Keanu, his eyes going wide. He pulled his phone out, hesitant. Keanu saw him. In the past, he might have felt a spike of anxiety or an urge to pull his hoodie up and hide. He might have felt like he had to perform or be on for a fan. But today, he didn't feel that. He just felt calm. He looked at the young man and gave a small, tired smile. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. The young man seemed to understand. He put his phone away, smiled back respectfully, and gave a little wave before continuing on his walk. It was a small interaction, but it meant everything to Keanu. It was a reminder that he didn't need to be the bigger-than-life hero. He didn't need to sign autographs or pose for pictures to validate who he was. He could just be a guy on a bench. That was enough. He shifted his weight on the stone bench, feeling the rough texture against his legs. He thought about the narrow vessel in his heart that had caused so much trouble. It was still there, but now it was fixed. It was patched. It was strong again.
He felt a sense of gratitude toward his own body that he had never felt before. He had spent so long punishing it, pushing it to the limit, and when it finally broke, he had spent the time to fix it. He realized that being heartfelt wasn't about big speeches or dramatic movie moments. It was about this. It was about sitting in the sun, feeling the breeze, and knowing that your heart is beating. It was about appreciating the quiet moments that most people ignore because they are too busy rushing to the next thing. Keanu took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp air. He could feel his heart beating in his chest, strong and rhythmic. Thump, 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 thump. It was the most beautiful sound in the world to him right now. It was the sound of a second chance. He stood up slowly, brushing a few crumbs off his pants. He felt a little stiffness, but it felt good to stretch his legs. He looked down the path that wound through the park, leading toward the street. He didn't have a destination. He wasn't running to a meeting. He wasn't late for a call time. He was just going to walk. He started walking, his hands in his pockets, moving at a slow, easy pace. He watched a squirrel dart up a tree trunk. He watched a leaf float down from a branch and land on the grass. He felt the ground beneath his feet with every step. He wasn't the invincible action star anymore. He knew that now. He was breakable. He was vulnerable. But as he walked along the path, the sun warming his back, he realized that being vulnerable didn't mean being weak. It meant being real. It meant knowing exactly how precious life was and treating it with the care it deserved. The shocking discovery had nearly killed him. Instead, it had taught him how to live. He wasn't running from the silence anymore. He was walking right into it, and he found that he liked the company. He smiled to himself, a small, private smile that no one else saw, and continued on his way, grateful for every single step.